Hi, everybody. I'm Blanche Podhajski from the Stern Center in Vermont, and I was coming down the elevator to this presentation, and this woman said, "Oh, are you speaking?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "What's your topic?" And I said, "Grammar." And she said, "Great for Friday afternoon." So I thank you for being here, because this is going to make, if you don't already love it, and I think I already am talking to the converted, I'm hoping you're going to leave really loving this, because the origin of this talk really came last year at the IDA conference in San Diego, when I was having lunch with a colleague who's a speech and language pathologist working for some publishing work that we're doing in Arizona. And we were both talking about how we love grammar, and isn't it just really fabulous how people are rediscovering it. And we've got to give it some marketing. It needs branding. It really needs better branding, you know. So how do we do that? And then the woman to my immediate right is saying, well, I think we should put something really like like an ugly kid, or something like somebody crying, or somebody really doing something miserable, because grammar is miserable. Who enjoyed learning grammar? And I said, well, I think we're going to have to figure out a way to make it fun. So that's what I'm delighted to be with you today. Thank you for coming on a Friday afternoon. This is the Stern Center where I work and where a lot of this work is originated. The Stern Center's name has language in its title, because although my background is as a speech and language pathologist and my doctoral work is in learning disabilities, the intrinsic and inextricable link between spoken and written language is like being rediscovered, and it's a little bit frightening. But I founded the Stern Center in 1983. And before that, in 1972, Jim Mattingly published Language by Eye and by Ear, which was, again, not a new thing, but I was also a doctoral student of Doris Johnson's, who wrote the first book on learning disabilities, and truly has a seminal paper published in 1982 on spoken and written language connections. And it's a paper that we continue to use when we teach medical students through the Department of Neurology, when we teach pediatric psychiatry fellows, when we teach communication sciences students, because it is so critical for all of us who work with children who have literacy issues to understand that it's all with oral language underpinnings. So I do have to disclose I have no financial gain from this presentation, although I am a co-author of some of Mindplay's work on reading and how we teach teachers about reading, and the grammar component of this was one that I did, and so I will be using some of the slides for that, but it's right now in submission, and who knows where or when it will ever get published, but our hope is that it will be next fall. So if it does get published, I don't get any of the proceeds. The organization, which is a nonprofit, gets 1/4 of the 15%. So, okay. All right, so I was trying to think of what an analogy would be for the grammar's new face. And this, if many of you may remember when we used to use the dial phones, but the iPhone appendage is really where I see grammar now. Grammar is the new iPhone. So what is grammar? Grammar is a system, a set of rules that governs how we use words in spoken and written language. And it influences, obviously, oral expression, reading comprehension, written expression, as well as vocabulary, reading, and spelling. So the fact that we sometimes don't see it like in the Big Five doesn't mean that it's not under the Big Five, like in vocabulary and comprehension and decoding. So I love this cartoon because Dennis is saying, it looks like we spend most of our time inging. You know, like sleeping, eating, running, climbing. Now, this is phenomenal morphological awareness. Because what has he figured out? He's figured out that all the things that he loves to do that are actions are really nouns, just by adding ing. And that's kind of a fun thing. That's sort of like, the 3 ways ED can sound. When we teach the phonology of language, the 3 ways ED can sound is something we have to teach our children just the same way that we teach them that ing can change a verb into a noun. But first, you have to know about nouns and verbs. Okay? And basically, there are 8 parts of speech. And did most of you download the handout for this presentation? No. Okay. If you didn't, I have extras for you, and don't leave. I'll be sure to give you one. Okay. But in the handout, I would just recommend there is adverbs got somehow left out of the original, and when I was going through, or else it got eaten up. I don't understand what happens between Vermont and Dallas, but somehow adverbs got lost. So be sure to add adverbs to your 8 parts of speech. Nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, articles, conjunctions, and prepositions. And most of us know those things, but maybe some of us don't know those things. And that is perfectly okay. So let's work with our students to help them discover what these parts of speech are. There's nothing wrong with using the real name for what these parts of speech are. I think we went through an educational phase where we said it's too much language. It's too much language to be telling children what an adverb is and what an adjective is and what does it matter. Well, it really does matter if they can figure out how to use it and have the meta linguistic awareness of why they want to put more adverbs into their essay, why they want to make their vocabulary richer, and why they want to look at the morphological foundation of their reading and their spelling. And it's all part of the same language system. So let's look at the words like Detroit. Whoops. Now this is supposed to work where Detroit, oh, look at it does. Okay, but it puts in more than one. So Detroit's a noun, but you can do this. The purpose of this activity, had it worked as I thought it would work, was that in a classroom environment, a classroom teacher can be doing grammar activities with large groups, 2nd graders, 3rd graders, 4th graders, to help reinforce their knowledge of the names of parts in speech. Detroit is a proper noun. You don't have to know it's proper or not proper, but it is a noun because it names a person, place, or thing, right? An adjective describes a noun. So an adjective like delightful can be used instead of saying happy all the time. And we all know when we see the written language of children, especially children with language disabilities, how the same words are repeated again and again and again. And if we want children to be thinking outside the box and to be making their writing richer, and if they're not readers, how are they going to learn that language, that vocabulary, unless we help them think in categories about how to embellish? So what do we have? We have swiftly as an adverb. We know that adverbs always modify verbs, right? Just like adjectives always modify nouns. Boy, shouldn't be such a deep, dark secret. It's really kind of cool to know that you can take these nouns and make them richer. It's the same thing as the $50 word when you get to read a multisyllabic word and you can decode it. If you have more vocabulary and you know what parts of speech you can use, your writing can become wealthier. Pronouns like ourselves, that's an interesting pronoun though, isn't it? Ourselves. Usually we know like I, she, he, and we'll still see the 7-year-olds who come talking about him's not her, him's not here, her's not there. And you say, why? This child comes from a very, well-educated family. Where did that come from? I saw it in a little dyslexic 7-year-old, and she was still stuck. But it's, again, that whole morphophonemic difference in some of our children with language disabilities. And it was so wonderful to hear Dr. Berninger yesterday at the keynote talking about the morphophonemic differences. Okay, and we all know about morpho being the prefix in that particular word for word units, and phonemic being the sounds. I think we've gotten brilliant at doing phonemic awareness in most places. We're really very comfortable with phonemic awareness. We're not as comfortable with morphological awareness. Okay? We're not quite sure yet how to teach grammar. And that's what I'm hoping that you're going to leave today with, are some ideas about how to think about it, how to make it fun, and how to teach it. Okay, so articles, we all know about articles. I also want to tell you later about how just by eliminating one little article, we can create such confusion for children in the comprehension of text. And that's why it's also important to understand the grammar underpinnings. Although is a beautiful conjunction, around is a preposition. Now, I think one of the reasons I also remember liking grammar so much is I was good at diagramming. Did any of you ever diagram sentences? Oh, look at all you. Oh, that's so fabulous. Diagramming sentences is not a bad way to go. You know, if you do nouns and verbs, and even if you call them subjects and predicates, and you divide them right down the middle, kids can really get into this. And we're going to talk about some programs that are doing it quite nicely right now. But there are beautiful words that come into different parts of speech. Dream, what a beautiful verb. Friendship, whose, beneath. You can do this, and you've got the answers anyway. So I'm just going to complete this because this didn't. Great. Okay. I want to show you a video. This is the Peggy Price from the Stern Center, who's just a master teacher, and she's an Orton Gillingham almost fellow. But this is in a second grade classroom where she is doing a parts of speech activity. Now, oh, please. Okay.
All right. So this morning, guys are going to build sentences for me. Yes, that was absolutely right. An action word. Who can give me an example? Willa. That's what I was thinking too. Jumping. Yes, Ava. Skiing. Yes, Owen. Biking. Yes. Running. Prancing. Oh, I like that. Yeah, a horse could prance. A person could prance. Scooting. Or scooter. Oh, on a scooter. Yeah. And okay, last hand, Elsie.
Like Massachusetts, like a state.
So would that be a verb or a noun? So can I, if I say, go Massachusetts, do you know what I mean by that? No. But I could say, we are going to drive to Massachusetts. So Massachusetts is a noun, because it's a place, right? It's a place. I could say Massachusetts.
Good morning, Union Elementary School teachers. If you have not taken attendance, please do so at this time. You can do it either on paper or on the computer.
Yeah. Okay. Now, this is hard. Adjective. Carson.
Something that describes like black cat.
Yes, so cat would be my what?
No.
Noun, that's the thing. Cat's the noun. And so now, Carson, you want to come up?
Sure.
An adjective describes a noun. Yeah. And is it going, would it come after the verb or near the noun?
Near the noun.
Yeah, so how about you can go stand on this side of Grace, we'll all scoot over this way. All right. So this one's really hard. An adverb. So I'm going to teach it to you because I know you haven't learned this one yet.
Where's an adverb?
Oh, okay, you do Mad Lib. So yes,
Is it like a verb in past tense?
you're close and it has to do with a verb, but it's not past tense. You're very close.
An adverb is not in any of those categories. It's just like a word like the or an.
Oh, you are so close. You're talking about an article. So I'm going to have you come up and be the article in just a minute. So do you see how adverb, if I were to fold it, what word do I have? Verb. So what if I want to add to my verb? So let's say, for example, some of you guys said jump, right? Jumping. I think that was Willa. Well, how is Willa jumping? Is she jumping softly? Is she jumping heavily? Is she jumping quickly? Is she jumping slowly? So an adverb describes the verb, just like the adjective describes the noun. Okay, so who would like to come up and since we already have two, well, how about Owen? You can go ahead and come on up. All right. And now, article was exactly what Lex said. Could you say that again? You said it's just a word.
It's just a word that doesn't fit in any category, and it's just like a word like the or and or a or something like that.
Yeah, it's the or a, not and. And usually we start our sentence like the black cat jumps softly. Yeah. So I'm going to have all of you guys go back to your seats, but you guys are going to need to come up in just a minute. So you can all go back to your seats right now.
Okay, that was actually 2 videos in one, but I was going to quit while I was ahead, so you got to at least see both of them. In any event, I love her recovery when the little girl on the left, after she's going through all the verbs and prancing and skipping and walking, goes Massachusetts. And the recovery to say yes. And when you drive to Massachusetts, we have a verb with a noun. But it really is amazing that kind of learning is not coming automatically for that little girl, even in that modeling activity. So we already even know who is going to need more explicit direct instruction. So now if I can find my way out of this, and we can go forward. Okay. So it's all about informed teachers. And I was at Erin Washburn's session this afternoon. I don't know if any of you were there, but she was doing the 20-year retrospective on Louisa Motz's seminal work on what teachers need to know to teach language and to teach reading to our kids. And they're doing some research right now, 20 years later, with different groups of reading specialists, professional learning educators, teachers of English as a second language. And we're trying to see which groups, again, have that kind of knowledge. And phonology knowledge is looking really good. But morphology knowledge among regular classroom teachers and special educators and teachers of reading came in between 20 and 64%. And that's kind of concerning. But again, we can't expect children to learn what teachers haven't been taught. And we know this historically from how do we teach reading using the Big Five. But now I think we're addressing more of what we need to teach them also about spoken language. So teachers need to understand the grammatical structure just as well as they understand the phonological structure of how the language works, as well as be familiar with this evidence on complex syntax acquisition. Okay. So you've already now seen that, so we can move on to morphophony, and I'm going to come back down because I'm more comfortable being closer to you. And we'll see how this works. What is a morpheme? This was an interesting, I don't know if some of you were here for the research on the Mind Play Reading Coach, which is an online program to teach children basic phonics, vocabulary, morphology, syntax concepts. But in any event, one of the reasons that a teacher companion was done, because children were coming in after they were on the coach, they were doing independent online instruction about morphology, and they would come in the next day and say, I learned a new morpheme last night. And the teacher would say, what's a morpheme? Because, again, that wasn't part of her language repertoire. But obviously we know that morphemes come in both bound and free forms, and that they're about meaningful word parts. So we know that looked makes an ed, makes a verb passive, and s makes a noun plural. But I can't do this without the remote. Well, I knew She'll say, that last Friday afternoon session was really interesting. Okay. So, 2 slices of cheese on mine, I'll just have 1 chi. So what is the morphological construct that Dolly is applying? Plural, absolutely right. And she even knows that the z sound can make a noun plural. And so when she hears a word like cheese, even though it's a collective plural, right, she assumes that it's a chi. Now, most of our words morphologically, when we develop, come from either base words or from root words, okay? Now, those of you who are good structured language teachers know all about base words and where we go in terms of adding morphological endings, suffixes, to make them into other kinds of nouns or adjectives. They're words that come from the Anglo-Saxon origin of our language, right? They're usually for common objects and actions, and they can stand alone, right? But roots can't stand alone. And that was what a lot of the teachers in the study that I was talking about earlier on teacher knowledge for morphology had trouble with. They had trouble with roots and what roots are. And roots are word forms like to throw that come from other origins in our language, like Latin, right? Or they come from the Greek. And when you look at these kinds of words, you immediately see the words of our content area classes. And when we think of literacy across the ages, across the school years, across the content areas, what a beautiful way to teach content areas how to expand students' language by teaching them about roots, prefixes, suffixes, and base words for derivation. Okay? Mathematical terms. Now, what's everybody studying in school? We're studying the roots of words in the English language. We're learning about the Polynesia Islands. Well, that would be a place where people forget a lot of stuff. Okay? So it's fascinating to watch children. I love to watch, actually, cartoonists who play with children's language because it makes really good sense what kids are trying to figure out. And it's our job to try to tell them, that's a really clever thing to think. Okay? But in this case, it's not a derived word from a root form. So I was waiting for Dr. Berninger yesterday to get to morphosyntactic awareness. I don't think she had time, in all honesty, because she crammed as much as she could possibly cram into that wonderful presentation. But she did speak to morphophonemic awareness. But morphosyntactic awareness also speaks to the individual word parts as well as sentences, like the children walked home quickly. So we have an article, a noun, a verb, another noun, and an adverb. And why does it come in that form? Because most wonderful of all are sentences and how they make friends one with another, and how the words within those sentences are governed by some rule orders. And that's why many times it's so hard for us to learn a foreign language that has a different order, a different rule system for how we join words together to make sentences. Okay. Where does the adjective go? Does it go before or does it go after the noun? So let's look at the 4 basic types of sentences. And those of you who teach written language are probably familiar with this. But that's been another aha at this conference, is that written language is being rediscovered. Have you noticed that in our definitions of literacy? We've been talking a lot about reading, but we haven't been talking as much about the written language parts of dyslexia that cause problems for our children and where the, again, underpinnings of those are in their spoken language. So if we think about simple, compound, complex, and compound, complex sentences, that's really only 4 kinds of sentences. That's not that hard to teach if we know, again, what they are. But this is the one, I love this kernel distance theory. All that means is the more words that come between the subject and the predicate, the more difficult a sentence is going to be to process. And this is where our kids with language disabilities get really, really lost. So the witch who yelled at the children grabbed the box. Who grabbed the box? The witch. But usually what kids will do is they'll put the closest noun to the verb and answer. The children grabbed the box. And they'll get very confused in the processing of more complex sentences. Obviously, we're trying to do this in an hour. If we were really going to delve into grammar deeply, we could spend at least a 6-hour seminar on it. But I'm hoping this is just going to be a whetting of the appetite, okay? So let's look at what the difficulties are in sentence comprehension. And this is from some of Joanne Carlisle's earlier work, which is really just fabulous. Voice, passive construction. We'll talk about examples of each of these. Word order, double negation, the effect of little words, verb phrases, and ambiguous sentences. Okay, so let's look at voice, passive construction. All voice means is that verbs can be used to show whether the subject is active, doing the verb, or passive. So if it's performed by the subject, it's active. If it's performed upon the subject, it's passive. So Carlos made the lasagna. Who made the lasagna? Carlos. The lasagna was made by Carlos. Who made the lasagna? Still Carlos, right. It's just that when you're reading it, it requires more processing, okay? Linguistic processing. Okay, here's word order. Marissa brought only 6 donuts. Only Marissa brought 6 donuts. Okay, so in the first sentence, what the heck? Wait a minute. I'm going to get rid of that. Okay. In the first sentence, the meaning around it, the context, because we have no context here, right? We just have a sentence in isolation. The meaning could be, we've got 30 people, and Marissa only brought only 6 donuts. Okay, so that means the rest of the 4 of us are going to have to make up for all the other donuts, right? But only Marissa brought 6 donuts means that she would be the only one. Am I making that distinction? Yeah. Okay, you got it. Kids will get confused. Double negation. We always encourage people when they write, even for reports, when we do evaluations, when we write for publication, to avoid these kinds of issues that would confuse the reader, like double negation. I would never have invited her mother. I would never not have invited her mother. Totally different meanings based on one double negation in the latter. Okay? The effect of little words. The captain's diary offered a few clues about the location of the treasure. The captain's diary offered few clues about the location of the treasure. When is the captain's diary more valuable? When it offered a few cues about the location of the treasure. Think about children with fluency issues. Think about children who have difficulty with basic text comprehension. This is a really big one. The use of less common verb tenses and the addition of helping verbs. Okay, auxiliary is the big word for helping verbs. May result in confusion for some poor readers. We should have done our homework. I wished I hadn't told her. Many times, if you're encountering a sentence like this, you have to read it several times. I wished I hadn't told her. Did I tell her? I wished I hadn't told her. Okay, the person wished that he didn't tell her. Okay? We should have done our homework. What does that should mean? We should have done our homework carries a huge, what does it mean? We didn't. That's right. Okay? There's a lot of assumes in our language, but grammar carries the nugget. It really carries the nugget if we can teach children how to break it down into these important differences in word form. Susan spoke to the man, this is ambiguous, with the microphone. Did Susan use the microphone to speak, or did she speak to the man who had the microphone? It's not a clear sentence. You would never accept this in a paper from a student because you'd say, I don't understand what you mean. Does Susan have the microphone? How could you make that sentence better? To the man who was holding the microphone. Excellent. You could put in, what would you put in? You would put in one of those lovely pronouns that you know about. The who, what, where, when, why pronouns. Remember those magic pronouns? What's wrong with teaching magic pronouns? We'll talk a little bit more about magic pronouns. Reference. Reference is another confusion. A word can't be understood in its own right. It must make reference to something else for the meaning. For example, this. Wait a minute. Where's this one? Tatiana is a champion swimmer. She hopes to try out for the Olympics. It refers back to Tatiana. But I'll have that or I'll have this. One of the biggest errors in children's writing is using this ambiguously. This is what I want. What do you want? Here's a good one. This is exactly why we should not use cell phones in cars. What does this refer to? In the two pictures that we are shown, one being the cartoon, person on the left is falling off the cliff. It's an accident. This means having an accident. In the first one, it means, what does this refer to? This could mean you could hit somebody because you're looking at your cell phone. There are many different ways in which this can be used. It's a wonderful word. It's a wonderful pronoun, but you need to sometimes clarify it or make it more explicitly. This situation in the picture, this picture shows, all right, this picture shows why we should not use cell phones, because we could hit people on the street. Because becomes a conjunction that we can teach children that explains an ambiguity in the beginning of the sentence. Okay? Who. Let's talk about who. I worked with Rita Lyon originally. He was our research director at the Stern Center in the early 80s. And he and I were observing a student in the Communication Sciences Disorders program who was getting her master's working with one of our children. And they were doing a who, what, where, why activity. And he and I were sitting watching, and all of a sudden, the 5th grade boy turns to the clinician and says, do you mean that every time you say who, you want me to answer with a person? And Reed and I looked at each other and said, we had this child in instruction already for like 5 weeks, and neither one of us realized that he was that low functioning in his understanding of basic pronouns. It's sometimes that we don't really know what the kids don't know, and we're building their knowledge on information they don't have. And who, that one was just mind-boggling to me. Now here's another one. The boy whose mother was driving the red car offered to take us all to soccer practice. Whose mother is driving? Is the boy taking us to soccer? Who's taking us to soccer? The boy whose mother was driving the red car offered to take us all. That is a very dense sentence. We have to show children how we could break these sentences up into smaller sentences. Have them be the detectives, have them find the meaning, have them break it down into several simple sentences. then they can reverse the process and make it into a more complex, compound sentence. There are some wonderful programs that are now doing that. Do you all know fanboys? Yes. Good job. Fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or. Yeah, good. So, terrific. Those are the connectors that help us do effective sentence writing. Just like we do the big five for reading on the fingers of one hand, we teach children the mnemonics, like fanboys, for how you can make simple sentences into more complex sentences, into even a more complex sentence, by using these words correctly. And also having a sense of audience. Why is written language harder than spoken language? You can't see the person that you're talking to, right? When you're talking to someone, you know, oh, it's late in the day, they're getting a little tired. Oh, I didn't make that point really clearly because they're looking a little askance. They're nodding their heads, that's a really good thing. They're smiling, they're still here, you know. So all those things you sort of take into account. But if this were written in a document, in a manuscript, okay, I'd have to make sure my language was so clear that there was absolutely no ambiguity. And that's why writing is so hard for all of us. Even those of us who love language find writing so much harder because you have to have a sense of audience and be explicit with the words so that the readers know exactly what you mean. So basically, writing sentences operates off what used to be called the Fitzgerald Key. It was a way of teaching deaf children how to manipulate language into spoken and written forms, right? Any of you come from that background? Okay. So you always have in your first column the who, and you help children by using concrete markers. And there are several concrete marker programs. We'll talk about them, and you have there's some resources in your handout. Who does what, how, to whom, what or where, when or why. And it helps you expand. And kids really enjoy this activity because they can make $50 sentences. Just like they want to read $50 words. They want to build $50 sentences. And you could also reverse the process and do it in reading comprehension activities by saying, which sentences do you think are really $50 sentences? Boy, that was a $100 sentence, but maybe we want a refund because I really didn't understand what that person was talking about. They had a lot of words and they had a lot of conjunctions and a lot of adjectives and a lot of adverbs. But did you really understand what that sentence meant? Might have been better to make it 2 sentences that we really understood. So having the conversation with children is another way to go. Roy Koenigsknecht and his colleagues at Northwestern originated what was called interactive language development teaching. And it was a way of helping very little children use narrative language to expand utterances. It's the same approach that can be used for written language. Okay? You start off with basic sentences, and with little children, you'd use picture cues. Okay? So the narrative is that Prince wants to go outside. Prince is scratching at the door. Prince is scratching at the door. You expand the utterance because he wants to go outside. You substitute a pronoun for a noun. You're expanding the utterance. You're taking it up a hierarchy of parts of speech. He is scratching at the door because he wants to go outside. Okay, we've told the story. The child's followed along. With very little preschool children, you can do it with flannel board figures. You can do it on whiteboards phenomenally. The teacher then says, why is he scratching? Student practices coming back. He is scratching at the door because he wants to go outside. You've taught pronoun transformation. You've taught use of conjunction. Okay? Interactive language development teaching. Now, if everything goes well, you will see a Framing Your Thoughts video. Many of you know the work of Tori Green from Project Read. Tori Green developed Framing Your Thoughts, which is still remains a landmark program, which uses the parts of speech from the Fitzgerald Key. And this is Sandy Boyer, one of our instructors, doing this on an individual session with the key cards that you can also use in groups. Hang on.
Okay, so here's our sentence frame that we worked on last week. And we've been practicing building simple sentences, or kernel, and popping the kernel, and adding information.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to get it louder, and it's not happening. Thank you, Liliana.
So here's our sentence frame that we worked on last week. And we've been practicing building simple sentences, or kernel, and popping the kernel, and adding information so that we have more information and we can provide more of a picture in our head for the reader, a picture for the reader. So let's build a sentence with Midnight and Sam. Start with Midnight and Sam.
Midnight and
And put it on our sentence frame.
Can we do it Sam and then?
Sure.
Sam and
Should we underline Sam and Midnight? Are they our...
yeah, they're our pair.
Are they subjects or are they verbs?
They are subjects.
So let's underline Sam and Midnight were what?
That was because I didn't find it.
And let's find a good active verb. Here are our verbs.
How about sleep?
Sleep. All right, they sleep. And they do plenty of that.
Or is it sleep?
Sleep. Good point. Sam and Midnight sleeps? Or Sam and Midnight sleep?
Yeah.
Sleep. If it's one, then it would be sleep. Sam sleeps. But if it's plural, if your subject is plural, then we don't have the S on the verb. And we can work on that a little bit more. Sam at midnight sleep now. Is that a complete thought? Is it a sentence?
Well,
Does it have a subject and a predicate, a verb and the predicate that tells what happens to the subject?
yeah.
Is it very interesting? Does it create a picture?
It creates not.
Not really.
I mean, like,
So,
you can't sleep.
yeah. So how about we use our expanders? Our when, where, how, or why. And let's expand. Let's pick 2 expander phrases.
Great. Okay, so here are some resources that I want to share with you. Again, if you need a handout, they're right up here. The Story Grammar Marker, which MindWing developed. It's a great nonverbal. Sometimes kids for multi-sensory instruction enjoy noun, verb, adjective, adverb, and they can climb up using the braid. It's both for younger children, and it also has an older version. It helps delve into the why questions. We've talked a lot about the who, what, when, where, but also the why questions of feelings and planning, motivations, all for development of inferencing and critical thinking. The interactive language development teaching, this is a really old classic program. If you have trouble finding it, send me an email so that I can send you some scripts if there are particular parts of language that you'd like to work with. If you work with little children, preschoolers, it's absolutely fabulous. Primary school children, and then you can elevate it for children who have language delay. The Winston Grammar Program is another really classic kind of from basic to advanced. It teaches you the parts of speech. Some grammar programs are so limited in terms of what they present. They just do very basic noun, verb kinds of constructs. And many of our kids are not, they're ahead of that, but not to the advanced complex compound sentence level. So Winston Grammar Program does a really nice job of being sequential and progressive. So Cuisenaire rods, Linda Hecker of Landmark College in Vermont. If any of you have used those, she uses them as a nonverbal marker, just like the Fitzgerald Key uses the blocks. It's to teach basic sentence parts. She does it with adolescents at Landmark School and college students. And framing your thoughts, which you just saw. So remember the grammar rocks. I hope this hasn't been too convoluted, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have or talk to anybody individually about programs or the interrelationship between spoken and written language. So thank you very much.